Beneath the heat of a late afternoon sun, a villager searching for water struck something that did not sound like earth. The soil around him was dry, the kind that usually gives way with a muted sigh, yet this impact rang with a dull metallic tone. Curious, he scraped away the packed sediment until a small corroded object emerged, its surface mottled with age. At first it seemed like debris from some forgotten tool, but as he lifted it toward the fading light, a faint outline of interlocking shapes caught his eye. The gears, though fused by centuries, formed patterns too deliberate to be natural. He sensed instinctively that, whatever this was, it did not belong to the world he knew. The object eventually reached a regional museum, where scholars debated its origin with growing discomfort. It appeared impossibly old, yet unmistakably engineered. Metallurgical studies only deepened the mystery. The alloy used to craft its pieces did not match the technological ability of the culture buried at the site. Experts suggested contamination, misplacement, or modern intrusion, yet none of these explanations fit comfortably. The artifact resisted categorization, as if determined to keep its story sealed within layers of rust. As the object moved quietly through academic hands, each researcher felt a subtle unease. They recognized elements of machinery, but not of any machine recorded in known history. Some noted uncanny similarities to mechanisms found far from the discovery site fragments, unearthed in deserts, mountains, and riverbeds, each dismissed as anomalies, each quietly filed away. When the scholars compared these pieces, an unsettling pattern emerged. The fragments seemed to echo one another, as though they were faint reflections of a greater whole now lost to time. Those who examined the device admitted, often reluctantly, that it hinted at a sophistication out of place by nearly 2 millennia. Such precision suggested a lineage of knowledge entirely absent from the surrounding archaeological record. The thought lingered like a whisper. Perhaps this discovery was not an invention of its era, but a survivor from a world erased before history learned to write. Even without a clear conclusion, the artifact carried a quiet weight. It unsettled assumptions, disturbed timelines, and made the familiar narrative of human progress feel thin at the edges. If a single mechanism could slip through the cracks of time with its gears still recognizable, what else might be buried beyond reach? As the dust settled around its discovery, one question rose gently through the silence, guiding us toward the next mystery waiting beneath the surface. Though the villagers returned to their routines and the museum stored the device in a quiet drawer, its presence refused to fade. Researchers who encountered it found themselves wondering about forgotten landscapes, vanished workshops, and hands that shaped metal with knowledge far beyond their era. The artifact became less an object than an invitation, a soft suggestion that the past might be far older, stranger, and more layered than we dare imagine. Its mystery continues to unfold. For centuries, museums have displayed objects whose stories never quite aligned with their labels. A bronze fragment tucked in a quiet corner, a set of gears described as decorative, a carved stone dismissed as symbolic, all placed behind glass with tidy explanations that never fully matched the unease they inspired. Visitors walked past them without suspicion, trusting the plaques to tell the whole truth. Yet beneath that calm certainty lingered the faint impression that some artifacts were not meant to be ornamental at all. Their shapes seemed purposeful, their contours too deliberate to belong solely to myth or imagination. Medieval monks once sketched strange devices they claimed to witness during their travels. Statues that moved without being touched, gates that opened by themselves, and wheels that spun in perfect rhythm with no visible source of motion. Scholars later softened these descriptions, suggesting that the monks misinterpreted rituals or misunderstood natural forces. But the drawings remained, their lines confident and steady, as if the monks were recording something they believed to be real rather than magical. When examined today, the mechanisms they depicted resemble components familiar to modern engineering hinges, pulleys, balance systems assembled long before such knowledge supposedly existed. Even older stories deepen the puzzle. Greek myths speak of golden servants crafted by divine hands, capable of performing tasks on their own. Egyptian temple records describe objects that breathed and responded, their movements hidden behind sacred walls. Chinese chronicles mention artisans who built lifelike figures, able to dance, bow, or follow commands. Mesopotamian tablets, worn by time, reference tools that acted without human touch. Across these vast distances and cultures, the pattern repeats. Descriptions of self-moving devices, appearing in eras that should not have possessed the means to create them. Historians often explain these accounts as metaphors, symbols meant to convey spiritual power or cultural prestige. But when these fragments are gathered together, they begin to form a different shape. The metaphorical language falls away, revealing hints of gears turning behind myths, axles hidden beneath stories, and rotating spheres described with a precision that feels at odds with pure imagination. The similarities are too specific, too consistent, to dismiss entirely. It becomes difficult not to wonder whether these stories are softened versions of something their writers had truly seen or feared to describe plainly. The deeper these clues are studied, the more they resemble pieces of a larger puzzle scattered across continents. Each artifact, each drawing, each myth appears unrelated, yet they fit together with surprising ease when viewed through the lens of forgotten technology. What once seemed whimsical begins to feel strangely deliberate, as if ancient people recorded truths disguised as legends, hoping that someone, someday, would notice the patterns they left behind. And as these connections surface, one quiet question rises with them, guiding the mind toward the next horizon. If so many traces were hidden in plain sight, misread and overlooked for generations, perhaps the stories we trust most hold only the gentlest outlines of deeper realities. Perhaps the people who told them were not imagining wonders, they were remembering them. Across the ancient world, stories were shaped not only by imagination, but by the limits of language. When early scribes attempted to describe the strange or unfamiliar, they turned to the symbols they understood best. A device that produced light without flame became a gift from the heavens. A machine that moved on its own must have been alive. In their eyes, the boundary between the mechanical and the divine was thin, almost invisible, and so the records they left behind read like poetry, while hinting at something far more tangible. Their words preserved experiences they could not fully name, like memories warped by time, yet still tethered to truth. Greek myths tell of chariots that roared through the sky, guided by unseen forces. They describe golden servants crafted by mysterious hands, following commands with obedient precision. To a modern reader, these tales shimmer with fantasy, but to ancient listeners, they might have carried a different resonance. They may have been retellings of something witnessed long before objects or machines whose workings were forgotten, leaving behind only echoes dressed in divine language. In India's epics, there are accounts of flying vehicles that moved with the rhythm of storms, machines capable of shifting direction effortlessly, guided by something deeper than wind. These were called celestial craft, but their descriptions bear traces of engineered structure layers, compartments, controlled motion. Over centuries, these details softened into legend, yet small technical hints survived between the lines, waiting for curious eyes to notice. China's early chronicles speak of artisans who created figures that walked, bowed, and opened their mouths to speak. Some were said to follow visitors through palace halls, their movements smooth and deliberate. Later scholars insisted these were metaphors for social order or symbolic guardianship, but the original texts are strangely matter-of-fact. They offer no poetic flourish, only simple descriptions, as though the writers believed they were documenting everyday wonders rather than inventions beyond their age. Even across the oceans, in the civilizations of the Americas, stories emerged of gates that opened to the touch of sunlight and objects that hummed with hidden power. These myths were often filtered through ritual and ceremony, yet fragments remain that feel oddly physical, as if shaped by memory rather than dream. When cultures separated by vast distances record similar images, moving statues, self-opening doors, chariots that defy nature, the parallels become difficult to ignore. Perhaps these myths are not fantasies born from collective imagination, but memories softened into story. Trauma becomes metaphor, wonder becomes legend. Over generations, the mechanical skeleton of truth dissolves, leaving behind only narrative skin. What the ancients saw may have been real, but described through symbols suited for their time, not ours. And if myths are memories, then the past they point to may be far stranger than our histories suggest. As these possibilities settle quietly in the mind, another question rises with them. If stories across the world remember machines through the fog of allegory, then the next mystery becomes inevitable. Who were the people capable of building such things, and what traces did they leave behind for us to find? When history speaks of early engineering, it often presents the story as a gentle climb, simple tools becoming complex ones, crude mechanisms slowly refined across generations. But the deeper one looks, the stranger that narrative becomes. Certain inventions arrive not as tentative experiments, but as polished creations that seem to have skipped entire stages of development. They appear suddenly, fully formed, as if their makers were remembering rather than discovering. And it is within this silence between what should exist and what does exist that the first great engineers emerge, their work hinting at roots far older than the records that survived. Hero of Alexandria stands among the most puzzling of them. In a world where most people relied on muscle, wind, or water to move anything of importance, Hero created devices that responded to heat, pressure, and carefully controlled steam. His so-called aeolipile, often dismissed as a toy, demonstrated principles that would not reappear meaningfully until the industrial age. He built automatic doors for temples, coin-operated machines, and theatrical devices that mimicked life with uncanny accuracy. His writings read less like the musings of an inventor experimenting for the first time, and more like the notes of someone refining long-standing techniques. It is as if he were preserving a memory rather than crafting a novelty. Archimedes, too, seems out of place in his time. His understanding of mathematics and mechanics reached levels that would take Western civilization centuries to regain. The precision of his war machines, the complexity of his pulleys, and the rumored devices described in ancient accounts feel uncomfortably ahead of their era. Legends claim he built weapons capable of focusing sunlight to ignite ships or mirrors, arranged with such accuracy that they behaved almost like engineered lenses. Whether these tales are exaggerations or faint echoes of forgotten skill, they reveal something unusual about the world he inhabited, a world where advanced ideas were possible, but rarely survived the chaos of history. Far to the east, ancient Chinese engineers produced automata, intricate clocks, and astronomical mechanisms of extraordinary detail. Descriptions of walking figures, rotating celestial spheres, and water-driven machinery reveal a mechanical sophistication that should have taken centuries of incremental development. Yet these inventions appeared, dazzled their contemporaries, and then vanished with the dynasties that nurtured them. Their existence feels less like the beginning of a technological lineage, and more like a shard of a broken tradition resurfacing briefly before fading once more. These early engineers are remembered as singular geniuses, isolated prodigies whose brilliance defied the limits of their time. But genius alone cannot explain the sudden leaps embedded in their work. Knowledge of this caliber rarely emerges without precedent. It suggests a deeper inheritance, a shadowed lineage whose origins lie somewhere beyond recorded memory. Perhaps these engineers were not lone visionaries, but inheritors of fragments, glimpses of techniques preserved imperfectly across generations. As the last traces of their inventions disappear into history's quiet, another mystery begins to rise. If these engineers rediscovered pieces of something older, then what was the original machine, the one that should not have existed at all? When the corroded fragments were first lifted from the seabed, no one imagined they once belonged to a machine. They looked like encrusted shards of bronze, warped by time and water, hardly different from countless relics recovered from ancient shipwrecks. Yet, as conservators brushed away layers of sediment, faint patterns emerged, curved lines, tiny teeth, and fragments of circles that hinted at something far more deliberate. What appeared at first to be random damage began to resemble the remnants of interlocking gears crafted with a precision entirely out of place for the era to which they were attributed. The fragments were reassembled slowly, each piece revealing new mysteries. Researchers identified gear ratios that reflected astronomical cycles with unsettling accuracy. Wheels marked with inscriptions aligned perfectly with known patterns of the sun, moon, and planets. When reconstructed, the mechanism appeared capable of predicting eclipses, solstices, and the complex dance of celestial bodies, with a sophistication rivaling instruments created during the Renaissance nearly 2,000 years later. The deeper the analysis went, the clearer it became that this was not an accident, nor a symbolic object. It was a functional machine designed with mathematical intent. Historians struggled to place it within the technological timeline. Nothing else from its era exhibited remotely similar engineering. The metalwork required precise cutting tools modern scholars believed ancient craftsmen did not possess. The gear systems implied knowledge of trigonometry and mechanical principles, supposedly unknown at the time. Some researchers attempted to minimize the implications, suggesting it was a lone marvel created by an unknown genius. But even that explanation faltered. Genius may spark ideas, but precision requires an established tradition, a workshop, a lineage of knowledge. None existed, or none that survived. As the device revealed more of its secrets, the atmosphere around it shifted from curiosity to quiet unease. Its creators had understood the sky intimately, encoding celestial rhythms into bronze with an elegance that defied simple categorization. They had built a machine that bridged heaven and earth, a device that transformed cosmic patterns into turning gears and sliding indicators. The question haunting every researcher was not only how such a device was constructed, but why its sophistication appeared suddenly, with no earlier prototypes and no later successors for nearly 2 millennia. The thought that emerged was uncomfortable. Perhaps this machine was not the beginning of a technological story, but the end of one. Perhaps it was the surviving echo of a knowledge system mostly erased, passed down imperfectly through generations until only a single device remained to hint at its origins. Its creators may have inherited techniques far older than their civilization, carrying fragments of forgotten understanding through time without fully grasping their own heritage. The mechanism stood like a whisper from a world that should not exist within the boundaries of recorded history. Its gears turned not only in bronze but in the minds of those who studied it, nudging them toward an inevitable question, one that reaches beyond craftsmanship and into the shadows of human memory. If a machine this advanced appeared where it should not, then who built it? And from where did they learn what the rest of the world had forgotten? The more researchers examined the ancient mechanism, the more unsettling its silence became. Objects of great sophistication usually leave trails, notes, prototypes, discarded attempts, or at the very least, stories of the craftsman responsible. Yet this device emerged from history like a ghost. The era it belonged to had no known workshops equipped to cut gears with such precision. No schools taught the mathematics required to calculate their ratios. No surviving texts hinted at artisans capable of building anything remotely comparable. It was as though the machine had appeared fully formed, crafted by hands trained in a tradition the rest of the world had forgotten. Scholars searched ancient manuscripts for any mention of a workshop or inventor that might explain its existence. Their efforts returned little more than fragments, passing references to artisans whose skills were rumoured rather than documented. Whispers of travellers who carried strange knowledge learned from lands beyond memory, and stories of tools said to move with the rhythm of the heavens. None of these scraps provided clarity, yet together they created an impression that something had once been known, something kept deliberately small, as if those who possessed it understood its fragility. This absence invites an unsettling possibility. Maybe there were no inventors in the conventional sense, no lineage of craftsmen gradually refining their methods across generations. Perhaps the knowledge arrived abruptly, carried by one of those rare accidents of history when an old idea resurfaces in a new age. A fragment of a scroll rescued from a collapsing library, a battered device inherited through generations, or the fading memories of a wandering scholar, each could serve as the spark that reignites a forgotten flame. The machine might not have been an innovation at all, but a reconstruction, a remembrance shaped by those who sensed they were holding the last thread of something ancient. If a small group of engineers once guarded this knowledge, they may have existed at the edge of their civilization, working quietly, unacknowledged by the authorities who recorded history. Their work may have been too specialized, too strange, or too poorly understood by the broader culture to earn mention in official accounts. In such cases, brilliance often survives only in the shadows, passed hand to hand until circumstances overwhelm it. The world may not have been ready to support what these engineers could build, and so their knowledge flickered briefly before fading, leaving behind a single artifact to speak for them. The device's very existence hints at a deeper story. If the people capable of building it truly left no trace, it suggests they themselves may have been inheritors, custodians of techniques that did not originate in their own time. Their silence becomes a clue. It implies that what they held was already fragile when they received it, already slipping away from memory, like a language spoken fluently by a few but understood by none of their neighbours. And so the question grows heavier. If the inventors cannot be found in their own age, perhaps we are searching in the wrong direction. Perhaps their predecessors lived elsewhere, in older worlds whose remains lie scattered far beyond this single machine. The next step is to look outward, to see if other civilizations preserved similar echoes of impossible craft. Long before modern technology reshaped the world, scattered civilizations recorded stories of devices that seemed to move with a life of their own. These accounts appear in places separated by mountains, oceans, and centuries, yet they share an uncanny resemblance, as though distant cultures were remembering pieces of the same forgotten dream. In ancient China, court chronicles describe automata that served emperors during ceremonial displays. These mechanical attendants bowed, carried trays, and opened doors with deliberate movements that astonished foreign visitors. Historians often treat such accounts as exaggerated courtly spectacle, yet the descriptions are detailed enough to suggest engineered joints, weighted mechanisms, and internal systems far beyond what should have existed in their time. Further west, in the libraries of Iraq, scholars designed water-driven clocks capable of marking minutes with delicate precision. Some of these clocks reportedly displayed celestial motions, rotating small models of the heavens in perfect harmony with the sky above. Their internal components, when reconstructed, reveal an understanding of mechanical timing that seems abruptly advanced, appearing out of nowhere, shining briefly, then fading with the fall of the quartz that supported them. These devices, like the Chinese automata, do not fit neatly into a gradual evolution of technology. Instead, they stand like islands of brilliance in a sea of simpler tools. Meanwhile, ancient Indian texts speak of flying vehicles that glided through the air, mechanical birds that obeyed commands, and chariots powered by forces described in metaphorical language. Whether these descriptions emerged from ritual poetry, observation, or inherited memory is difficult to determine, but their consistency across manuscripts is striking. They portray mechanisms with layered construction, internal chambers, and controlled movement features that evoke engineered design rather than pure myth. Even if symbolic, these stories carry the faint outline of something once familiar, something that ancient writers struggled to describe using the vocabulary of their age. Across the ocean, in pre-Columbian America, legends tell of doors that opened at precise moments, statues that shifted position, and objects said to hum with hidden strength. Though these tales are often framed within spiritual narratives, they contain fragments that feel mechanical rather than mystical. When viewed individually, each story can be dismissed as cultural metaphor, but when placed side by side, they form a pattern too persistent to ignore. Civilizations with no direct contact, living in vastly different landscapes, all recorded memories of machines that appeared abruptly and left no clear path of development behind them. The convergence raises a quiet, unsettling question. If these cultures were isolated, how did they all arrive at such similar depictions of self-moving tools? It is possible they did not invent independently, but rediscovered remnants of a deeper, older tradition, one scattered across continents like seeds carried by forgotten winds. Perhaps these stories preserved the last reflections of knowledge that once flowed freely, only to splinter as civilizations rose and fell. And if these fragments emerged everywhere, what might have happened to the countless pieces that never survived the long passage of time? Every era carries stories of wonders that appeared briefly and then slipped into silence, leaving behind only rumors or fragments too small to anchor in certainty. As scholars traced the faint trail of advanced mechanisms through the ancient world, a disturbing possibility began to emerge. Perhaps the machines did not simply fade from memory, they were erased. Human history is full of moments when knowledge burned faster than it could be recorded. A single night of flames could unravel centuries of careful study, leaving future generations to wonder whether the missing chapters ever truly existed. Across continents, the pattern repeats with unsettling consistency. Libraries that once held vast collections of technical scrolls were consumed in fires sparked by war, politics, or fear. Entire traditions of engineering vanished when conquerors swept through cities, determined to control not only people but the narrative of invention itself. The victors rewrote history to glorify their ascent, and in doing so, they often destroyed the tools and texts of the civilizations they replaced. Machines that contradicted the preferred story of human progress had no place in the new order, and so they disappeared into ash and rubble. Religious transformations added another layer of fragility. As new belief systems rose, older knowledge was frequently dismissed as heresy, sorcery, or dangerous curiosity. Workshops once devoted to building intricate devices were shuttered, Scripts describing mechanical wonders were recast as metaphors or condemned outright. With each shift in power, the guardians of knowledge found themselves vulnerable. If their understanding was not welcomed by those in authority, it was silenced. A world that once may have celebrated invention could quickly become one that feared it. There are records brief, trembling, incomplete of manuscripts that described self-moving tools, water-driven automata, and celestial machines. These texts were copied only a handful of times before being lost. Archivists wrote of rooms filled with diagrams, only for those rooms to be ransacked or sealed forever during conflicts. Archaeologists occasionally uncover remnants of workshops whose purpose is unclear. Metal shavings too fine for simple tools, broken gears that match no known devices, or charred remains of instruments that hint at precision long forgotten. Each discovery feels like a whisper of something larger, a hint of a technological tradition severed abruptly before it could take root. What makes this silence most haunting is the suggestion that some of the machines might have been more than curiosities. Devices capable of predicting celestial events or revealing hidden patterns could easily threaten the authority of rulers or priests. Knowledge that offered insight into cycles, disasters, or power structures might have been seen as destabilizing. If these machines carried warnings or revealed truths that clashed with the beliefs of their era, their destruction becomes not just possible, but understandable. Control often depends on limiting what people are allowed to know. As the last traces of these forgotten technologies fade into dust, one unsettling question lingers like smoke after a fire. Who decided what deserved to survive? And if these machines were deliberately erased, what, exactly, were they hiding or revealing that someone feared so deeply? Long before the idea of robotics took shape in the modern world, ancient civilizations recorded stories of statues that moved with uncanny precision, figures that seemed less carved than awakened. These accounts appear so frequently and with such specific detail that their persistence becomes difficult to ignore. In Greece, the writings of Homer speak of golden attendants who served the gods, moving with deliberate grace. Plato described mechanical guardians said to patrol hidden chambers. Even more striking are the legends of Talos, the bronze giant who circled Crete's shores, protecting the island with unyielding vigilance. Though framed as myth, these descriptions contain hints of gears, hinges, and internal systems disguised beneath the language of divinity. In Egypt, temple inscriptions describe statues that could breathe or whisper during rituals. Priests attributed these movements to the presence of gods, yet later, scholars uncovered evidence of hidden chambers, counterbalances, and narrow passageways perfectly aligned with these idols. Mechanisms may have amplified sound or triggered movement at precise moments, giving the impression that the statues responded to worshippers. To common eyes, unfamiliar with mechanical logic, these subtleties would have felt a live confirmation that the sacred world was listening. Ancient engineers in Alexandria, China, and Persia later demonstrated that such devices were not only possible, but actively constructed. Surviving texts describe automata capable of pouring liquids, opening doors, or playing simple sequences on musical instruments. Some were powered by water pressure, others by weights or early pneumatic systems. Their creators understood how to channel force, balance motion, and conceal complexity behind smooth surfaces. These machines were often used for theatre or ceremony, blending entertainment with wonder, but the craftsmanship behind them reveals a deeper tradition of mechanical experimentation that stretches far beyond spectacle. Yet when stories of these creations were retold generations later, the technical explanations often vanished, replaced by spiritual or mythic interpretations. Without a shared vocabulary for gears or pressure systems, people described movement as possession, voice as divine breath, and motion as a spark of life. The boundary between machine and being blurred, not because the devices were magical, but because observers lacked the tools to understand what they witnessed. Myth stepped in where language failed, and memory softened into legend. As these accounts accumulate across cultures, they raise a quiet question. Were ancient people simply imaginative storytellers, or were they recording encounters with machines whose sophistication surprised even them? The consistency of the details, the timing of movements, the precision of gestures, the illusion of breathing suggests more than coincidence. It hints at engineered creations advanced enough to stir awe, yet familiar enough to be remembered long after their mechanisms disappeared. The statues that moved and spoke may never have been alive, but they shaped memory as though they were. And if some ancient machines could imitate life, the next mystery emerges with gentle inevitability. To move with such purpose, to breathe with such illusion, they must have drawn power from something beyond simple force. What energy coursed through these early mechanical beings, and how did their creators harness it? When ancient machines are recreated in modern laboratories, scholars often point to familiar forces, water pressure, steam, or counterweights as the engines behind their movement. These explanations are tidy, comforting, and consistent with the mechanical vocabulary we expect from early civilizations. Yet the ancient record resists being confined to simple mechanisms. As researchers read further into old manuscripts, translations, and ritual descriptions, certain phrases begin to unsettle the narrative. Texts speak of fire that did not burn, of breath that moved stone, of light captured inside a jar. These expressions are poetic on the surface, but beneath their imagery lies the outline of something more deliberate, perhaps early experiments in energies we no longer recognize. In some ruins, archaeologists have found vessels coated with metals that would have produced mild electrical currents when filled with acidic liquids. The reaction is weak by modern standards, but strong enough to trigger sound, spark movement, or activate small components. Such discoveries hint that at least some ancient cultures may have toyed with electricity long before scientific language existed to describe it. Their writings avoid technical explanation not because the principles were unknown, but because the people recording them had no framework to translate these forces into words. Other accounts mention mechanisms driven by air pressure, with descriptions of chambers that filled and emptied, like the lungs of a giant. These passages suggest that pneumatics, the controlled movement of air, played a role in animating certain devices. If air was channeled strategically through valves or hollow tubes, machines could lurch, twist, or release sound in ways that appeared miraculous. To those who witnessed them, the effect must have seemed like invisible strength, an unseen breath stirring lifeless materials. Even more intriguing are references to lamps that glowed without flame, inscriptions that describe light captured and stored, and stories of objects that shone for years in sealed rooms. Scholars often dismiss these accounts as symbolic, yet they echo across civilizations, separated by both geography and time. Whether these lights were chemical reactions, early batteries, or remnants of older knowledge passed down imperfectly, they push the imagination toward the possibility that ancient machines once used power sources that today survive only in fragments of myth. The deeper mystery is not just how these forces operated, but why early engineers pursued them at all. Water and weight were reliable, abundant, and easily understood. But some craftsmen reached beyond practicality, experimenting with energies far more complex. Their motivations remain obscured, but the pattern suggests replication rather than innovation. It is as though they were imitating the logic of older devices machines they had seen, inherited, or been told about, attempting to recreate powers no longer fully understood. Their success was partial, their memory incomplete, yet the effort reveals a lineage stretching into forgotten eras. As these hints accumulate, they invite a quiet, lingering question. If ancient machines drew upon forces now lost or misunderstood, what else might they have been capable of? And if the power that once animated them carried meaning beyond motion, perhaps it held warnings that ancient societies tried to preserve, even as their knowledge slipped into darkness. Across the ancient world, stories of machines often live alongside something far more unsettling: prophecies. These predictions, scattered through tablets, scrolls, and oral traditions, describe mechanical beings that stirred only during great upheavals, devices that awakened when empires trembled, and instruments said to remember eras long buried beneath time. Though later generations dismissed these accounts as superstition or poetic flourish, their consistency suggests that ancient societies may have viewed certain machines not merely as curiosities, but as omens. In Greek traditions, tales speak of bronze guardians that roused themselves when cities faced ruin, their movements tied to celestial events rather than human command. Indian epics describe chariots and flying devices, said to reappear during cosmic transitions, moments when the world entered new cycles of creation and destruction. Chinese prophecies mention artificial figures that rose from stillness when dynastic change approached, opening their eyes as signs of heaven's shifting mandate. These accounts do not present machines as tools, but as instruments woven into the fabric of fate. The language surrounding these predictions often blends mechanical imagery with the rhythm of the cosmos. Some texts describe devices calibrated to stars, drums that beat only when certain constellations gathered, and objects that released sound or movement during eclipses. It is easy to read such descriptions as metaphors, yet the precision of the details gears aligned with lunar cycles, components tuned to the sun's path, suggests an awareness of mechanisms synchronized to the sky itself. In a time when natural forces shaped survival, anything capable of responding to celestial patterns would have been viewed with awe, fear, or reverence. These prophecies hint that ancient societies may have understood the machines as more than inventions. They became symbols of continuity, reminders that the world moved through repeating patterns. When a device activated unexpectedly, it was interpreted as a sign that history had entered a dangerous phase one that echoed forgotten disasters. Some legends describe machines built specifically to warn future generations, their purpose obscured as the civilizations that created them fell away. By the time their stories reached later scribes, the meaning had dissolved, leaving only enigmatic predictions behind. What makes these accounts most haunting is the recurring suggestion that the machines carried knowledge older than the societies that preserved them. They are described as remembering previous ages, awakening not through magic but through design triggered by forces their builders once understood. If these devices truly responded to celestial events, then they were constructed with an awareness of cycles far longer than the rise and fall of a single kingdom. Their activation may have been less prophecy than programming, responding to conditions set long before. As we trace these predictions across continents, a subtle tension grows. Why did so many civilizations warn of machines that should not have existed? What did they fear? Not the devices themselves, but the return of whatever those devices were built to mark. The question lingers gently in the air, drawing the mind toward the next mystery. If these machines acted like memories of older eras, then perhaps they were not inventions at all, but survivors. Were they marvels of their time or remnants from a world that came before? When archaeologists uncover the earliest tools of ancient civilizations, they expect to find a learning curve, rough attempts giving way to refinement, primitive forms gradually evolving into sophisticated ones. Yet the historical record tells a different, quieter story. Some of the earliest artifacts appear not at the beginning of a technological progression, but at its peak. Perfectly straight drill marks carved into stone, harder than steel. Surfaces smoothed with a precision comparable to modern machining. Metal tools whose composition does not match the known smelting capabilities of the cultures that supposedly produced them. These objects do not feel like first steps, they feel like final echoes. In sites scattered across the world, remnants of advanced workmanship appear abruptly, as though someone pressed knowledge into the hands of early civilizations before vanishing again. In South America, stone blocks cut with angles so exact they defy explanation. In the Middle East, metallic objects embedded in strata far older than the societies capable of forging them. In Africa, artifacts fashioned from alloys unknown to the period. Each anomaly is easy to dismiss on its own, but together they form a pattern, one that suggests inheritance rather than invention. The most puzzling aspect is the absence of development. Cultures that should have needed centuries to progress, from basic stone tools to advanced engineering, instead leap forward without hesitation, creating wonders that appear suddenly and then disappear just as quickly. Tools and techniques emerge fully formed, as if their makers were recalling something rather than discovering it. Then, inexplicably, the knowledge fades. Workshops vanish, methods are forgotten, and the next generation returns to simpler craftsmanship, unable to replicate what their own ancestors achieved. These sudden appearances, and equally sudden retreats, hint at a deeper story, one that stretches beyond the lifespan of any single civilization. Geological records reveal periods of global upheaval, floods, volcanic winters, shifting climates capable of erasing entire cultures within a few generations. If an advanced society once thrived in a distant past, a catastrophe of that scale could have scattered its survivors across the world. Those who lived might have carried fragments of old knowledge in their memory, passing down hints and techniques, but lacking the means to preserve the entire system. What we see today could be the residue of that inheritance, appearing wherever those remnants resurfaced. The idea is not that the ancients possessed modern technology, but that they remembered shadows of an earlier age, echoes of tools and devices whose full designs were lost. Their descendants may have attempted to recreate what they dimly recalled, producing marvels beyond their era's capabilities before the knowledge faded again. Each civilization may have held a different piece of a much older whole, their scattered achievements reflecting the fractured memory of a world erased. As these possibilities quietly settle into place, the question grows heavier. If ancient machines were not creations of the societies that preserved them, then where did they truly come from? What was the civilization that built them first, and how much of its story survives beneath the layers of time? Chapter 4 begins with the search for that forgotten world. Long before Egypt raised its first pyramid, before Sumer pressed its earliest marks into wet clay, and before China mapped the heavens, the world may have held civilizations now lost to memory. Their traces do not fit neatly into the timelines taught in books, but they appear quietly in stone, soil, and story. Scattered across continents are structures far older than recorded history, built with a precision that challenges the tools attributed to their supposed creators. Enormous blocks cut and placed with tolerances so fine that even a knife blade cannot pass between them. Stones transported from quarries miles away, arranged in patterns aligned with celestial markers. These feats suggest not just ambition, but knowledge. Knowledge unexplained by the conventional progression of early human development. In other regions, entire underground cities lie hidden beneath the earth, carved with sprawling tunnels, complex ventilation systems, and chambers large enough to shelter thousands. These labyrinths are not crude shelters. They are engineered environments designed for long-term habitation. Their builders understood airflow, temperature control, and subterranean architecture. Yet no written records survive to explain why such cities were created, who constructed them, or what events compelled people to retreat underground for generations. The more these anomalies accumulate, the harder they are to dismiss as isolated curiosities. Across distant cultures, legends recount cataclysms that swept away earlier worlds, floods that rose without warning, firestorms that darkened the sky, or a long winter that devoured harvests. The stories differ in detail but share a striking consistency in theme. Something immense occurred, something powerful enough to force survivors to rebuild from almost nothing. These legends lingered in memory long after their causes were forgotten, preserved in myth rather than in stone. Mainstream archaeology often sidesteps these contradictions, not out of malice, but because established frameworks leave little room for them. When a single anomaly challenges decades of accepted chronology, the impulse is to categorize it as an outlier rather than reconsider the entire timeline. But if these anomalies are examined with calm curiosity, patterns begin to emerge, patterns that suggest an older, more complex chapter of human history, one erased by time, disaster, or both. The evidence is incomplete, but its silence is compelling. It invites contemplation rather than certainty. Some researchers argue that the earliest known civilizations might not represent the dawn of human ingenuity, but its resurgence. They may have risen not as pioneers, but as inheritors, the survivors of a forgotten age forced to rebuild with fragments of knowledge carried across continents. Their achievements become less beginning than continuation, the visible remnants of a much older story hidden just beyond reach. If this possibility holds even a sliver of truth, then the question shifts. Instead of wondering how early humans achieved these feats, we must ask what came before them. What tools did this forgotten civilization possess? What mechanisms guided their hands? And how much of their world lingers in the ruins, awaiting rediscovery? The next section begins exploring precisely that. The technologies this lost culture may have carried into the ages that followed. Across the remnants of the ancient world, there are tools and structures that defy the expectations of their age. They stand not as scattered curiosities, but as quiet indicators of knowledge far deeper than the timelines assigned to them. In the deserts of Egypt, for example, archaeologists have uncovered cores drilled from stone so hard that even modern diamond-tipped tools struggle to produce similar marks. The spiral grooves carved within them reveal a speed and pressure inconsistent with the copper implements early Egyptians supposedly used. These cuts are not hesitant or experimental, they are confident, controlled, and precise, the work of hands guided by methods we no longer understand. Far across the world in the Andes, Polygonal masonry forms walls that have endured centuries of earthquakes without shifting. The stones fit together in interlocking shapes, each piece uniquely carved to match its neighbours with uncanny accuracy. Their surfaces meet without mortar, yet the seams are so tight that light struggles to pass between them. Traditional explanations suggest slow trial and error, but the complexity of these designs hints at an underlying system, mathematical knowledge, or tools capable of translating geometry into flawless stonework. The skill required to execute such construction appears abruptly, without the gradual development one would expect. In other regions, ancient alloys reveal properties that challenge modern metallurgists. Some artifacts contain mixtures of metals that should not have been known in their era, created through processes that remain difficult to reproduce even with today's technology. These materials resist corrosion in unusual ways or maintain structural stability under conditions that would degrade contemporary equivalents. They represent a level of experimentation and understanding absent from the broader archaeological record. Their existence feels less like innovation and more like the echo of older practices carried forward imperfectly. Astronomical alignments deepen the mystery further. Temples, standing stones, and ceremonial structures across continents are oriented with astonishing precision to solstices, equinoxes, and the movements of distant stars. The engineering required to achieve such alignment suggests not only architectural skill, but an advanced grasp of celestial cycles. These observations must have been recorded, calculated, and applied with tools capable of translating cosmic patterns into earthly form. Yet no earlier examples of the instruments needed for such measurements have been found. The pattern is difficult to ignore. These technologies appear suddenly, as if borrowed rather than developed, used for a time, and then abandoned or forgotten. They do not resemble the inventions of a culture discovering its capabilities. They resemble the final expressions of inherited knowledge diminishing with each generation. This perspective introduces a gentle but powerful twist. Perhaps these feats were not the pinnacle of early civilizations, but the remnants of something older, a world whose sophistication flickered briefly through the hands of its successors. As the viewer considers these possibilities, the evidence settles like dust on a long-forgotten surface. If these tools were echoes of a deeper past, then something must have disrupted the chain of memory. The next section leads into that shadowed moment, exploring the ancient disasters that may have shattered the continuity of a world now lost. If an advanced civilization once existed long before the rise of Egypt or Sumer, its disappearance must have been swift and overwhelming. Cultures do not lose knowledge gently. They cling to it fiercely, passing it through generations like a lifeline. For such mastery to vanish so completely, something greater than human conflict must have intervened. Across myths and geological records alike, traces of immense upheaval whisper of a world reshaped by forces indifferent to memory. Climate shifted with startling speed, oceans rose and swallowed coastal plains. Skies darkened for years, beneath the ash of distant mountains. These events, recorded in softened language as floods, long nights, or cursed ages, might have erased not only people, but the structures that held their knowledge in place. In many traditions, a great flood marks the end of an earlier world. The story surfaces in Mesopotamia, in the Hebrew scriptures, across India, and even among distant indigenous cultures. Though details differ, the core is consistent. Waters rose without mercy, consuming cities and scattering survivors. Archaeological evidence reveals that at the close of the last ice age, sea levels surged dramatically, submerging continental shelves where early settlements may have thrived. Entire societies could have disappeared beneath the waves, leaving only myths to remember their fate. Other legends describe a long period of darkness. The Hindu yugas speak of ages ending in fire and shadow, followed by cycles of renewal. Similar imagery appears in northern traditions, where ash-filled skies heralded the fall of ancient realms. These stories echo geological patterns of volcanic winters, years when eruptions blocked sunlight, devastated crops, and shattered the fragile balance that early civilizations depended upon. In such conditions, survival becomes the only priority. Complex technologies, however advanced, cannot endure when the people who maintain them are forced into flight or perish. There are also hints of cosmic disturbances, tales of stars falling, of fiery serpents crossing the sky, of sudden cold gripping the earth. Researchers have proposed that comet impacts or atmospheric explosions may have triggered abrupt environmental collapse. These events require no imagination. They appear in the geological record as layers of soot, melted minerals, and sudden shifts in ancient climates. If a previous civilization relied on infrastructure, tools, or machines, such catastrophes would have shattered the continuity required to preserve them. The sorrow in this idea is quiet but profound. Knowledge may endure war and famine, but it cannot survive when its keepers vanish. The most intricate devices require minds that understand them, hands capable of repairing them, and communities stable enough to support those who protect their secrets. If those communities were scattered by disaster, their knowledge would fracture, surviving only in fragments carried by a few. What remains today, the anomalies, the impossible structures, the myths of machines, could be the faint reflections of a world undone before it could leave a full record. And yet, even in collapse, not everything is lost. Memories soften into stories, techniques become rituals, and fragments find their way into new lands. The next question arises naturally, quiet as a footstep in the ruins. Who preserved what little remained, and how far did they manage to carry the remnants of a dying age before time finally overtook them? When a civilization collapses, its tools and monuments may crumble, but its memories linger in the minds of those who survive. Among the scattered remnants of the first great age, there may have been individuals who carried fragments of lost knowledge like embers tucked inside their garments, delicate, flickering, and easily extinguished, yet powerful enough to ignite new beginnings if protected. These survivors, moving across a world reshaped by disaster, appear in later cultures not as refugees but as teachers, sages, or even gods. Their presence in myth feels less divine and more human. Weary travelers arriving with skills no one else possessed, offering guidance to societies struggling to rebuild. Ancient stories tell of mysterious figures who appeared after the great floods, instructing people in agriculture, architecture, and astronomy. In Mesopotamia, legends speak of Oannes, a being who taught humanity how to write and measure the heavens. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl arrives as a wandering teacher, bringing knowledge of calendars and construction. Across the Andes, Viracocha emerges from the sea, offering wisdom before vanishing into the mountains. These figures are described with reverence, often framed as gods, but their abilities resemble the practical skills of survivors who remembered a world their listeners had never known. Migration patterns support this quiet possibility. After global catastrophes, groups would have moved across continents in small clusters, searching for land untouched by ruin. Along their journeys, they would have carried fragments of stories, half-forgotten techniques, and symbolic systems meant to preserve meaning when language failed. Symbols carved into stone, repetitive geometric patterns, and the earliest sacred diagrams may have served as tools to pass on knowledge when materials and stability were scarce. Over generations, these symbols hardened into rituals, but their origins may lie in the desperate efforts of the last keepers trying to encode memories into forms that could survive. Some of the earliest engineering feats may reflect this inheritance. Monumental structures built with sudden precision, techniques that appear without precedent, and alignments too exact to be accidental, could be the attempts of these survivors to recreate what they once knew. Their methods, incomplete and fragile, would have slipped away as their communities scattered further. But the traces remain the remnants of designs remembered imperfectly, but executed with determination. The image of these keepers is quietly haunting, individuals standing amid a broken world, holding shards of knowledge from a vanished age. They were not inventors in the ordinary sense, but guardians of memory, working to preserve whatever they could before time closed over the past. Their efforts did not restore the world they lost, but the fragments they carried seeded the first sparks of later civilizations. As these possibilities settle gently into place, another question emerges, soft yet persistent. If knowledge was preserved and passed forward through the hands of a few, where did it surface next? Which civilizations inherited these ancient echoes? And what did they build from the fragments they received? Across the long arc of history, there are moments when precision engineering seems to reappear, like a forgotten melody, returning to those who no longer recall where they first heard it. After centuries marked by simple tools and modest machines, sudden bursts of mechanical brilliance illuminate the past with startling clarity. These moments feel less like inventions born from gradual experimentation and more like memories resurfacing echoes of an older knowledge stirring within new environments. In ancient Greece, long after the collapse of the First Great Age, a quiet revival began. Thinkers such as Archimedes and Ctesibius devised mechanisms whose sophistication stood in stark contrast to the tools of their contemporaries. They created water organs capable of producing controlled melodies, pumps that lifted water with rhythmic precision, and intricate devices that modeled celestial movements. Their inventions appeared abruptly, without the lengthy developmental lineage one might expect. Instead, they felt like rediscoveries, concepts emerging fully formed, as though borrowed from a distant memory. Centuries later, during the Islamic Golden Age, a similar resurgence took place. Scholars in Baghdad and Damascus designed automata that poured drinks, played music, and performed elaborate sequences using cams, weights, and hydraulic systems. The Banu Musa brothers described mechanisms so advanced that some modern historians marvel at their ingenuity. Al-Jazari's creations, crafted with an elegance and precision centuries ahead of their time, included programmable machines, self-regulating systems, and detailed diagrams that suggest an understanding of engineering far beyond what their era should have supported. These works appeared not as tentative experiments, but as confident expressions of knowledge reawakened. In medieval China, the cycle repeated once more. Engineers built astronomical clocks that mapped the heavens with extraordinary accuracy. Su Song's towering clockwork masterpiece used chains, escapements, and gear systems that rivaled devices crafted in Europe many centuries later. His work, like that of the earlier Greek and Islamic engineers, stands out as an island of brilliance surrounded by simpler technologies. The craftsmanship is too advanced to be dismissed as chance, and too isolated to reflect continuous development. It feels instead like an inherited whisper, taking shape through new hands. When seen together, these moments form a pattern, a quiet rhythm, emerging across civilizations separated by vast distances and centuries. Precision engineering does not evolve smoothly in these eras. It reappears suddenly, shines brightly, and then fades again. Each resurgence suggests that knowledge from older worlds may have found its way into the minds of scholars living in receptive times and places, where curiosity and stability allowed the fragments to grow once more. Their inventions do not stand alone. They stand as reminders that human memory, even when fractured, can still hold traces of forgotten ages. As these examples drift across history like sparks rising from deep water, another question surfaces with gentle inevitability. If such brilliance could appear so suddenly and then vanish just as quickly, what forces caused these breakthroughs to fade? And why, if they were rediscoveries, did they fail to take root long enough to reshape the world? Each time precision engineering resurfaced in the ancient and medieval world, its brilliance shone briefly before fading again, as if some unseen force swept through history, erasing the traces before they could take root. The pattern is subtle but persistent. Remarkable inventions appear suddenly, illuminate a generation, and then vanish without evolving into broader technological traditions. Their makers leave behind fragments of diagrams, half-remembered methods, and testimonials from stunned contemporaries, but rarely a lineage of students or workshops to carry their work forward. It is a rhythm of rediscovery, followed by silence, one that hints at the fragility of knowledge itself. War played a merciless role. Cities that served as centers of learning, Alexandria, Baghdad, Chang'an, fell repeatedly to armies who burned libraries and dismantled the communities that nurtured innovation. The destruction was often swift. Scholars who once exchanged ideas across languages and empires were scattered or killed, and with them vanished the quiet continuity required to maintain mechanical mastery. Even the most brilliant devices depend on a chain of hands capable of repairing, copying, and teaching them. When those hands disappear, brilliance becomes a memory. Cultural shifts also shaped the fate of early engineering. As religious and philosophical movements rose, they sometimes viewed mechanical marvels with suspicion or disdain. Devices that imitated life blurred the boundary between the natural and the unnatural, provoking fear in eras shaped by strict spiritual frameworks. Some inventions were labeled heretical, others frivolous. Workshops closed as patronage disappeared, and engineers turned towards simpler, socially accepted crafts. Slowly, the skills refined through rediscovery faded back into obscurity. Political instability deepened the fragility. Empires that supported experimentation often collapsed under their own weight, replaced by new powers more concerned with survival than curiosity. In such climates, the quest for innovation was replaced by the urgency of governance, defense, or reconstruction. Precision machines, delicate, complex, difficult to maintain, had no place in turbulent worlds. The silence that followed was not the silence of ignorance, but of distraction and fear. In some eras, suppression was deliberate. Rulers wary of losing authority tightly controlled knowledge that seemed too powerful or too unpredictable. They censored texts, confiscated devices, or limited engineering to state-approved functions. A machine that could calculate celestial events or predict seasonal changes threatened the influence of priests and kings. A device capable of revealing natural laws undermined the mystique on which authority often rested. The safest path was to restrict or destroy what could not be easily understood or controlled. The emotional weight of this slow erasure lingers like a faded echo. Again and again, humanity brushed against the edge of rediscovery, only to let the opportunity slip away. It is a recurring tragedy, a cycle in which knowledge survives just long enough for its potential to be recognized, then crumbles under the pressure of circumstance. As these patterns emerge, a quiet, unsettling thought rises. If this knowledge was truly inherited from a deeper past, perhaps something or someone understood the danger of its return. And if so, were there moments when entire civilizations stood on the brink of fully reclaiming what was lost? History is filled with moments when humanity brushed against the edge of rediscovery. Times when engineers, scholars, or entire cultures seemed poised to unlock the same mechanical mastery glimpsed in the ruins of far older worlds. These moments feel like delicate turning points, quiet intersections, where the past reached out through fragments of memory and nearly took hold again. They linger in the imagination as what-ifs, soft, bittersweet reminders that the ancient machines were never as distant as they seemed. In Hellenistic Greece, the work of engineers such as Hero and Archimedes came astonishingly close to reviving the principles behind the lost mechanisms. Their devices, steam-powered engines, automatic doors, precise pumps, rotating celestial models, were not tentative experiments, but confident expressions of mechanical logic. Had their world remained stable for just a few more generations, their discoveries might have broadened into an entirely different technological era. Instead, conflict and shifting power silenced their workshops, scattering their students and leaving only fragments for later historians. Centuries later, the Islamic Golden Age opened another window of possibility. Scholars like Al-Jazari created machines so intricate that modern engineers still marvel at their insight. His water clocks, automata, and self-regulating systems were not isolated curiosities, they were steps toward a mechanical language that could have transformed the medieval world. But regional instability and political upheaval prevented that language from spreading. Al-Jazari's treatises survived, but the momentum required to turn brilliance into tradition evaporated. His machines became admired relics rather than seeds of a new age. In medieval China, the genius of Suzong and his contemporaries nearly rekindled the astronomical engineering once seen in the first great civilization. Their clock towers mapped the heavens with exquisite precision, driven by gear systems that mirrored the logic encoded into ancient mechanisms. These inventions pushed the boundaries of what their society believed possible. Yet when dynasties fell and priorities shifted, the knowledge fractured once more. The clockworks were dismantled or abandoned, and the understanding behind them faded, surviving only in scattered descriptions. Even in the Renaissance, echoes surfaced again. Scholars rediscovered mathematical principles, experimented with gearing, and drafted designs for devices that resembled the mechanisms of earlier ages. Leonardo da Vinci, among others, seemed to reach instinctively toward forgotten patterns, sketching machines that blended imagination with uncanny familiarity. His drawings show glimpses of something older ideas emerging, as if from a distant memory rather than pure invention. But his prototypes remained on paper, constrained by the limitations and uncertainties of his time. Each of these civilizations stood on the threshold of remembering. Their engineers were not inventing from nothing. They were rediscovering, reconnecting with threads of knowledge that ran deeper than their own histories. And yet, each rediscovery was halted by war, by collapse, by the quiet inertia of societies unprepared for such leaps. The result is a long chain of almosts, moments when the world came close to rekindling the brilliance of the first machines, but never quite crossed the threshold. These near misses invite a final question, gentle yet persistent. If rediscovery has happened before, flickering through different eras and cultures, could it happen again? Chapter 6 begins with that possibility, exploring the hidden traces of ancient knowledge that may still be waiting for the right moment to resurface. Among the oldest libraries of the ancient world, tucked between myths, hymns, and administrative records, there exist a handful of scrolls that defy simple interpretation. At first glance, they resemble ordinary manuscripts worn ink on fragile fibers, their surfaces softened by age. But when examined closely, their markings reveal something far more unsettling. Instead of narrative prose or ritual instruction, these scrolls contain diagrams that look suspiciously like mechanical blueprints. Gears interlock across the parchment with mathematical precision. Axles connect to chambers whose function remains unknown. Ratios are written in cryptic notations, as if someone tried to translate complex engineering into symbols their era could support. These drawings confound researchers, not because they are unclear, but because they are too clear. Their proportions follow patterns recognizable in modern mechanics. Their components rely on symmetry, load distribution, and calculated motion concepts that supposedly developed much later. When scholars attempt to place these scrolls within their assigned timelines, contradictions appear. The societies credited with creating them lacked the metalworking capabilities, mathematical systems, or conceptual frameworks necessary to construct such devices. Yet the drawings persist, stubborn and precise, as though the hands that made them remembered techniques far older than the paper they wrote upon. Some scrolls are even stranger. They contain sketches of devices whose purpose eludes modern interpretation. Spheres nested within rotating shells, chambers connected by winding channels, rods that appear designed to move with synchronized timing. Engineers who examine these images often admit, reluctantly, that they resemble mechanisms functional in theory, but out of place in the context of early history. The consistency of these diagrams suggests intention, not imagination. They feel less like fantasies and more like attempts to record something real, even if the scribes lacked the materials to build it. The haunting quality of these scrolls lies in their tone. Many include brief annotations, soft, faded notes describing how something should turn gently, align with the sky, or move when the water breathes. These fragments read like instructions from people trying desperately to preserve knowledge, slipping beyond their reach. It is easy to imagine a forgotten engineer tracing these shapes by lamplight, aware that the world around them no longer understood what they were recording. They were not inventing, they were remembering, and in their memories, the machines still lived. The existence of these scrolls raises a quiet question that lingers beneath the surface. Why would someone in a world of simple tools feel compelled to document such complex mechanisms? The answer may lie not in their present but in their past. These diagrams might be the last whispers of a technological tradition inherited from a much older age. If the survivors of that age attempted to preserve even fragments of their knowledge, they would have done so through whatever means remained symbols, sketches, and coded instructions, hoping future generations might one day understand. As these possibilities settle into the mind, the puzzle deepens. If ancient engineers hid their knowledge in drawings too advanced for their time, how much more might they have concealed in symbols and diagrams disguised within sacred texts? Among the world's oldest sacred writings, patterns appear that seem, at first, purely symbolic circles, nested within squares, spirals that wind with deliberate rhythm, sequences of numbers repeated like quiet prayers. These images were long believed to hold only spiritual meaning, reflections of cosmic order or divine harmony. Yet as researchers study them with new eyes, a subtle question emerges. Were these symbols solely metaphoric, or were some of them carefully disguised instructions? When sacred texts are viewed not only as spiritual guides but as repositories of protected knowledge, their geometry begins to resemble something far more practical. Many traditions use diagrams whose precision seems out of place in purely religious works. Mandalas align with mathematical ratios found in mechanical design. Temple layouts mirror symmetrical patterns, similar to early machines. Some scriptures accompany their symbols with cryptic verses describing movement within stillness, or breath guided through chambers. Language that could easily be poetic, but could just as well reflect the workings of concealed mechanisms. Numerological sequences embedded in these texts, sometimes correspond to cyclical functions, suggesting hidden rhythms meant to be interpreted by those who knew the key. The scribes who preserved these teachings lived in eras when knowledge was fragile. Wars, purges, and cultural upheavals often threatened written memory. If certain ideas were considered too dangerous, too disruptive, or too sacred to record plainly, their guardians may have turned to metaphor and symbolism to shield them. Religious texts provided an ideal refuge. Their authority protected what was written within them, and their allegorical nature allowed scribes to encode truths without drawing unwanted attention. A simple diagram presented as spiritual art could survive for centuries, even millennia, because few would suspect it held anything more. In some traditions, the instructions for rituals resemble the constraints of mechanical functions. Movements must be repeated in exact quantities, performed at precise angles, or aligned with specific celestial events. While most scholars interpret these requirements as symbolic discipline, the overlap with mechanical logic is striking. A device dependent on timing or alignment would require similar precision. It is possible that the ritual preserved the structure of something once mechanical, translated into spiritual gestures when the original tools no longer existed. Other texts reference gates that open with numbers, pillars that sing, or hidden chambers that awaken with light. These passages, often dismissed as mythic embellishment, read differently when placed alongside the scrolls containing mechanical diagrams. They hint at devices remembered imperfectly, their forms softened into allegory, yet retaining traces of their purpose. For those who knew how to read them, these symbols may have served as reminders, maps, to reconstruct knowledge when the world was ready again. The notion that spiritual diagrams could contain mechanical principles does not diminish their sacred value. Instead, it suggests that spirituality and technology once intertwined more deeply than modern assumptions allow. Knowledge was not separated into compartments. The practical and the mystical existed side by side, encoded together so that both could survive. If ancient scribes hid mechanical knowledge within spiritual frameworks, they must have done so intentionally. The obvious question rises softly from beneath the surface. Who were these guardians of hidden truths? And how did they decide what deserved to be preserved? Section 6.3 turns to the secret groups who may have carried this fragile legacy forward. Across the fading corridors of history, there are hints of groups who worked not in open marketplaces or royal courts, but in hidden workshops, where knowledge passed quietly from master to student. These ancient societies left little behind, no grand monuments, no official chronicles, only scattered symbols, coded glyphs carved into stone, and whispered references in texts that seem almost embarrassed to acknowledge them. Yet their presence lingers like a faint imprint, suggesting that long after the great machines vanished from the world, a few dedicated keepers continued to guard what remained. In several civilizations, records speak of artisan guilds whose skills appeared far beyond their time. They traveled as wandering craftsmen, clockmakers, metalworkers, astronomers moving between kingdoms with a reputation for creating wonders no one else understood. Their methods were secretive, their tools wrapped in cloth, their diagrams rolled tightly and sealed. Villagers sometimes regarded them with suspicion, calling them magicians or sorcerers. Though the truth may have been simpler, they carried fragments of an older engineering tradition the rest of the world had forgotten. Archaeological remains occasionally reveal workshops buried beneath temples or palaces, equipped with drainage systems, ventilation shafts, and alcoves designed for storing delicate instruments. These chambers were not meant for public view. Their architecture suggests caution walls angled to conceal entrances, floors designed to dampen sound, ceilings marked with symbols identifiable only to those initiated into the Brotherhood. In one region, scholars found a series of geometric carvings beneath a collapsed shrine that matched diagrams seen in faraway lands, as though separate groups shared the same ancestral source, connected not by trade, but by memory. Written accounts from the Middle East and Asia mention groups of mechanical priests, artisans who performed demonstrations of moving idols or self-operating doors during rituals. Their knowledge was reserved for a chosen few, restricted by oaths and punishments severe enough to deter imitation. They were not merely performers, they were guardians of hidden techniques, maintaining traditions older than the institutions that employed them. Some of these groups vanished when dynasties shifted or temples burned, leaving behind only rumors of devices stored in sealed rooms. In Europe, medieval texts reference secret fraternities of builders who understood geometry and mechanics beyond the standard teachings of their time. Their symbols appear etched on stones in repetitive patterns, circles divided by ratios, interlocking triangles, spirals built with mathematical precision. To modern eyes, they look decorative. To someone preserving buried knowledge, they may have served as coded reminders, quiet markers revealing safe meeting places or instructions hidden in plain sight. The image that takes shape is not dramatic, but quietly haunting. Generations of engineers maintaining the last echoes of a vanished world, passing down techniques in whispers because open instruction would have invited suspicion or persecution. They did not hold complete blueprints, only fragments. Yet even fragments were precious. Even fragments were dangerous. The lingering question settles softly in the mind. If these societies protected knowledge with such devotion, what exactly were they trying to preserve? And why do some of the diagrams attributed to these groups describe mechanisms that remain beyond even our modern engineering? Among the fragments of ancient engineering, those scattered scrolls, coded diagrams, and whispered traditions, there exist a few designs that defy explanation, even in the modern age. They are not mythical devices conjured from imagination. They are drawings etched into metal, carved into stone, or preserved in manuscripts whose authenticity is unquestioned. Their proportions are precise, their purpose unmistakably mechanical, yet something about them exceeds the limits of our own capabilities. It is as though the draftsman who created them remembered a world more advanced than the one that followed. Some of these designs describe mechanisms requiring alloys no modern foundry has successfully reproduced. Their composition suggests a blend of metals in ratios that should not remain stable, or that require temperatures difficult to achieve even with today's industrial furnaces. When metallurgists attempt to replicate these mixtures, the results crumble or warp. And yet, the ancient samples endure proof that someone once understood a process we have yet to rediscover. Other diagrams call for machining tolerances measured in fractions so small that they challenge the precision of early industrial tools. Holes drilled to depths and angles that match modern aerospace components. Interlocking components whose surfaces must be polished to near mirror smoothness if the device is to function at all. Engineers reviewing these designs admit, quietly, that some of the tolerances exceed what their own equipment can produce without long, meticulous effort. The question then becomes unavoidable. How did ancient draftsmen create instructions for machines they should not have been able to build? Even more unsettling are the mechanisms whose functions remain unknown. Some diagrams show chambers connected by intricate channels, rotating spheres nested within other spheres, or elaborate systems of valves and weights arranged in patterns that resemble nothing in modern machinery. They do not align with familiar inventions, clocks, pumps, or tools, but appear to serve purposes we cannot yet guess. Their sophistication is undeniable, but their logic feels foreign, hinting at principles no longer part of our technological vocabulary. These designs are not isolated anomalies. Copies of similar diagrams appear in distant regions, drawn by cultures separated by time and geography. Their similarities suggest a shared origin, a root system buried deeper than any surviving record. When placed side by side with the earlier evidence, precision stonework, anomalous alloys, impossible cores, these blueprints complete a larger picture. They imply that what we now call advanced may only be one point in a repeating cycle of knowledge gained, lost, and regained incompletely. The mood that settles over this realization is quiet, almost reverent. Modern civilization prides itself on progress, yet these ancient designs whisper that we may not be the first to walk this path. We are simply the most recent. The knowledge, once held by earlier civilizations, slipped away through catastrophe or suppression, leaving behind fragments too advanced to fit comfortably into our history. As this truth takes shape, a deeper question emerges, like something rising slowly from deep water. If ancient machines truly existed, and if their designs exceeded even our abilities, then what were they built for? Long before telescopes swept across the night sky, and digital clocks marked the passing of each second, ancient civilizations crafted machines whose purpose was quiet, exacting, and profoundly ambitious. They sought to measure the rhythms of the cosmos. These devices did not merely record hours or trace the sun's path. They attempted to understand the deep patterns that shaped existence itself. Their makers believed that time was not a line but a pulse, and that by observing its cadence, humanity could glimpse the forces guiding both nature and destiny. Among the earliest of these instruments were astronomical mechanisms, capable of predicting eclipses with precision that astonished later scholars. Their interlocking gears mirrored the cycles of the moon and sun, turning with gentle inevitability as celestial bodies moved overhead. These machines were not decorative curiosities. They were tools for reading the language of the sky, capturing the subtle harmonies of planetary motion and translating them into something the human hand could touch. Their designs reveal not only mechanical skill, but an intimate understanding of the heavens' knowledge too complex to be coincidence. Timekeeping devices reflect the same sophistication. Water clocks calibrated to seasonal changes, shadow markers aligned with solstices, and rotating celestial spheres that trace the movements of stars all suggest a culture attuned to cosmic patterns. These tools did more than count hours. They mapped the relationship between earth and sky. Their precision implies that their makers believed human life was intertwined with celestial cycles, that the fortunes of kingdoms and the turning of seasons were part of a larger, orderly weave. Some ancient tablets describe machines used for computation devices that converted mathematical ideas into physical motion. Levers, gears, and rotating scales transformed complex equations into simple visual outcomes. These early computational tools feel like ancestors of modern calculators, yet they appear unexpectedly early, as though the knowledge behind them came not from gradual development, but from memory, a glimpse of older methods returning in simplified form. The deeper one explores these mechanisms, the clearer their purpose becomes. They were instruments for perceiving change before it arrived, for predicting the invisible tides that shaped the world. In many traditions, celestial events were seen not simply as astronomical phenomena, but as markers of transition. An eclipse signaled the turning of an age. A rare planetary alignment foretold upheaval. To predict such moments was to understand when history itself might shift. As this thought settles, a quiet implication drifts into focus. These machines were not built merely to satisfy curiosity. They were crafted to read cycles patterns that ancient societies believed governed both nature and human fate. Their purpose may have extended far beyond calculation. They may have served as early warning devices, tools for recognizing the moments when the world approached thresholds already crossed by civilizations long forgotten. And so, as these instruments trace their silent arcs through time, another question emerges with gentle clarity. If some ancient machines measured destiny, were there others meant to shape it? Across ancient landscapes, long before locks clicked and alarms chimed in the modern world, there existed stories of gates that opened without hands, doors that sealed themselves when danger approached, and statues that stood watch over sacred chambers as if alive. To later generations, these accounts became myth-embellished tales meant to impress pilgrims or frighten thieves. Yet woven through these stories is a quiet, recurring detail: precision, mechanisms that responded only under specific conditions, movements too deliberate to be coincidence, actions too consistent to be legend alone. Some temples in Egypt were said to possess doors that swung open when flames were lit on nearby altars. To the uninitiated, it seemed like divine approval. But hidden beneath the stone floor were channels and vessels, primitive hydraulic systems that expanded with heat, transferring pressure through concealed pipes. The effect would have appeared miraculous, a sign that the gods protected their sanctuaries. Whether created for reverence, intimidation, or genuine security, the result was the same: an early form of mechanical defense. In Greece, tales of the bronze giant Talos guarding Crete are often interpreted as fantasy, yet fragments of ancient texts describe him not as a magical being, but as a crafted sentinel powered by internal systems, patrolling the island's edge with unwavering purpose. If the story preserves even a shadow of truth, it may reflect memories of engineered guardians long gone, their design remembered only in softened mythic form. Other cultures tell of statues whose eyes seemed to follow intruders, or whose hands lifted weapons when approached improperly. Archaeological excavations have uncovered pedestal cavities large enough to hold counterweights, ropes, or primitive cams, mechanisms that could animate these figures under the right conditions. Such devices would have served both ritual and protection, creating an impression of vigilance that deterred those who approached with harmful intent. In ancient China, records speak of palace doors that shut automatically when unauthorized footsteps crossed specific thresholds. These accounts describe pressure plates disguised beneath rugs or stones, subtle triggers that activated hidden levers. Though simple in concept, their integration into architecture required extraordinary foresight. They were not toys or theatrical tricks. They were deliberate systems built to shield knowledge, treasures, or rulers from threats. The gentle truth emerging from these examples is that ancient protection was not always ritualistic. It was mechanical. Those who preserved fragments of older knowledge may have relied on such devices to safeguard scrolls, chambers, or tools inherited from forgotten ages. Without the means to openly teach or rebuild the ancient machines, they turned instead to smaller, practical systems of defense. In doing so, they transformed memory into function, embedding fragments of lost engineering into the everyday rhythm of sacred and political life. As these protective devices reappear across continents and eras, a soft insight settles into place. These machines were not designed to reveal mysteries, but to guard them symbols of a world that understood how fragile knowledge could be. They remind us that some truths were never meant for everyone, and that those who carried them recognized the danger of their misuse. Now another question rises slowly from the edges of history. If some machines defended sacred knowledge, were others built to foresee what even the guardians feared? Long before observatories rose above quiet hillsides, and telescopes brought distant galaxies into view, ancient civilizations built machines meant to understand the sky's most elusive rhythms. These devices were not grand or towering. Many were small enough to be cradled in two hands. Yet within their gears and inscriptions lived a sophistication that continues to trouble modern scholars. They did not merely track celestial movements, they anticipated them. Eclipses, solstices, lunar cycles, retrogrades, conjunctions, all were woven into patterns. The ancients followed with unwavering devotion, as if believing the sky carried secrets meant not just to be witnessed, but interpreted. Across cultures, the heavens were seen as a clock of profound precision. The Maya charted planetary cycles with accuracy that rivals modern calculations. Babylonian astronomers predicted lunar eclipses centuries in advance. Egyptian priests aligned temples with solstices so perfectly that sunlight pierced sanctuaries on a single day each year, illuminating hidden symbols. And in the ruins of Greece's past, intricate bronze fragments reveal a mechanism capable of forecasting celestial events decades ahead. Such achievements suggest a knowledge that did not develop gradually, but appeared as if remembered reflections of an older tradition kept alive through cycles of loss and rediscovery. These machines did more than map cosmic movements. They linked them to the fate of the world below. Ancient tablets describe eclipses as warnings of scarcity, alignments as signs of incoming floods, and planetary cycles as markers of the rise and fall of rulers. In some traditions, a rare celestial event foretold the end of an age, prompting rituals meant to prepare communities for upheaval. The machines that tracked these patterns were therefore more than astronomical tools. They were instruments for interpreting destiny, charting the invisible currents believed to shape human history. Many cultures saw the sky not as a distant realm, but as a mirror of the Earth's future. When planets gathered in unusual arrangements, scribes recorded the event with a seriousness reserved for omens. When the moon darkened unexpectedly, people believed it signaled the shifting of balance between worlds. These interpretations may seem symbolic today, yet the underlying precision required to anticipate such events points to a deeper purpose. The machines allowed their makers to prepare for disaster long before its arrival, a quiet form of protection born from observation and memory. But there is a softer, more haunting possibility. Some ancient devices appear calibrated to cycles far larger than a single lifetime patterns, spanning centuries, even millennia. Their creators may have believed that catastrophe followed a cosmic rhythm, one remembered dimly from an age before theirs. If so, these machines were not only forecasting natural events, they were echoing warnings inherited from a world that had already fallen. Each prediction would have carried the weight of survival, an attempt to prevent ancient mistakes from repeating. As this thought settles, the distinction between tool and message begins to blur. These devices did not simply record the heavens. They communicated something through their precision, something meant to outlast their makers. Were they built to warn future generations of repeating cycles, or to remind them of a past they had nearly forgotten? Across the world's oldest stories, a quiet, haunting pattern appears. Machines that stirred at the edge of disaster, devices that awakened when the sky darkened, or the earth began to shift. These tales come from cultures separated by oceans and millennia, yet their descriptions echo one another with uncanny resonance. In some traditions, a statue lifted its arm before a great flood. In others, a device released a tone when a long prophesied alignment of planets approached. These accounts are softened by myth, wrapped in symbolism, but something in them feels older than their storytellers, like memories carried forward from a world that had already fallen. Ancient people often believed their machines possessed awareness, but perhaps the truth was simpler and more profound. Some devices were built to respond to the rhythms of nature, calibrated to cycles that repeat across ages. When certain celestial configurations reappeared signals of climatic shifts, rising seas, or catastrophic storms, these machines may have activated automatically, not as magical beings, but as instruments designed long ago to warn whoever remained. Their creators might have understood patterns that stretched far beyond a single civilization's lifespan, patterns preserved through gears and ratios rather than through writing. In many cultures, prophecies describing the end of an age feel less like supernatural predictions and more like technological memory. They speak of the last time the sun dimmed, the year the waters swallowed the cities, or the night when the stars fell in familiar patterns. If earlier civilizations experienced global catastrophes, they might have encoded their warnings in devices meant to outlast language itself. When those same conditions returned, the machines would respond. To the survivors who no longer understood the engineering behind them, the reaction would feel divine, prophetic, an omen rather than a mechanism fulfilling its design. The idea takes on a quiet poignancy. Imagine engineers who survived the collapse of the first great age, carrying fragments of their knowledge into a fractured world. They could not rebuild their lost machines entirely, but they might have constructed simplified versions, devices capable of signaling the return of cosmic conditions that once brought devastation. These instruments were not meant to inspire fear. They were last gestures of protection, attempts to warn descendants who would live centuries after the builders were gone. Instead of instructions, the survivors left behavior. Instead of books, they left mechanisms that remembered. And because memory fades far more slowly in metal than in myth, traces of their intent seeped into the stories that followed. When these machines activated, people saw echoes of an older world resurfacing, omens, signs, warnings spoken through gears rather than through words. As this realization drifts into place, the atmosphere softens into contemplation. The machines may have been silent most of the time, but they were not built for silence. They waited, they listened, they responded only when the world entered familiar danger. If ancient devices once carried the memory of past cataclysms, then another question rises like a distant tremor. If they tried to warn us, what ultimately silenced them? Humanity often imagines that knowledge is permanent, that once an idea is discovered, it lives forever through books, teachings, or the march of progress. But history tells a softer, more tragic truth. Knowledge survives only as long as the hands that protect it remain steady, and the world that sustains it remains whole. The machines of earlier ages did not fade slowly or naturally. They vanished through abrupt ruptures in history, moments when the fragile bridges between generations collapsed. The story of their disappearance is not a single event, but a series of erasures, each one wiping away a layer of memory. Invasions toppled centers of learning that once supported early engineering. Libraries in regions stretching from the Mediterranean to South Asia burned as armies swept across fertile valleys and coastal cities. Workshops that held delicate mechanisms were plundered or destroyed, their tools melted for weapons, their records lost among smoke and rubble. When rulers changed, priorities shifted. Scholars fled, were silenced, or were forgotten. Ideas that required stability vanished as instability took their place. Religious upheavals deepened the silence. As new belief systems rose to prominence, older knowledge was often recast as dangerous, heretical, or simply irrelevant. Devices that once measured celestial cycles were reinterpreted as remnants of forbidden practices. Mechanisms that animated statues or opened temple doors were dismissed as illusions or condemned as sorcery. In many cases, their guardians hid them or dismantled them out of fear that possessing such knowledge might invite persecution. What was once revered became suspect, and suspicion quickly became erasure. Natural catastrophes exacted an even harsher toll. Floods swallowed coastal settlements where early machines had once been crafted. Earthquakes shattered the stone chambers where engineers kept their tools. Volcanic winters forced entire communities to abandon their cities, leaving behind nothing but the simplest possessions they could carry. In such moments, the continuity of knowledge fractured instantly. Techniques that required generations of apprenticeship were severed. Languages that named mechanical principles disappeared, and with them, the ability to decode old diagrams or reconstruct forgotten devices. Cultural shifts played their part quietly but decisively. Societies turned away from mechanical innovation toward poetry, warfare, ritual, or survival. When daily life demanded simplicity, complexity became a burden. Mechanisms that once served profound purposes fell out of use. Without hands to maintain them, their gears seized. Without minds to understand them, their meaning faded. A machine, even an extraordinary one, cannot defend itself against indifference. These erasures formed a pattern. The world repeatedly confronted moments that could have carried ancient knowledge forward, only to lose it again through a convergence of chaos, fear, and change. The sorrow lies in how close humanity came again and again to preserving the legacy of earlier ages. But each time, the fragile chain snapped, and the machines slipped into legend. And yet, a final question lingers softly beneath the ruins these erasures left behind. What if not all destruction was accidental? In every age, knowledge carries a quiet danger. It reshapes how people see the world, how they understand power, and whom they choose to trust. For those who ruled ancient civilizations, advanced technology was not simply a marvel, it was a threat. Machines that could predict celestial events, move without human touch, or guard sacred spaces challenged the foundations on which authority stood. And so, long before written history matured, fear became a force as powerful as any weapon, shaping what knowledge survived and what vanished into dust. Rulers feared disruption most of all. A device able to measure the heavens more accurately than priests, or predict natural cycles more reliably than tradition, could shift the balance of power within a kingdom. If a machine could foresee famine or eclipse, its keeper held influence greater than any crown. Some kings responded by seizing these tools, restricting their use to royal courts. Others chose a simpler, harsher path, destroying the devices and silencing those who built them. Control depended on maintaining a careful illusion, and anything capable of piercing that illusion became dangerous. Priests faced a different sort of fear, the fear of losing spiritual authority. Many early machines blurred the line between the divine and the mechanical. Temple doors that opened on their own, statues that emitted sound, and devices that mirrored celestial patterns, all threatened to expose rituals as engineering rather than miracle. For spiritual leaders, this was intolerable. When a machine replaces a god's hand, belief begins to unravel. To prevent this, some priesthoods outlawed mechanical experimentation, branding certain forms of knowledge as taboo. The machines were not rejected because they failed. They were rejected because they succeeded too well. Conquerors, too, feared what they did not understand. When armies swept across new lands, they encountered unfamiliar technologies, strange mechanisms, hidden workshops, fragments of engineering that made little sense to them. Rather than preserve these things, conquerors often destroyed them in the same sweep that toppled palaces and temples. A device whose purpose they couldn't grasp might be a weapon, a trap, or a symbol capable of uniting resistance. Better, they reasoned, to scatter its pieces than risk what it might mean. Even common people felt unease. In societies shaped by myth and ritual, a machine that acted on its own seemed alive, a thing that violated natural order. Fear turned quickly into superstition. Someone who worked with gears, levers, or hidden chambers could be called a sorcerer or a defiler. And once a label like that took hold, entire villages might turn against the keepers of knowledge, forcing them into secrecy or exile. The tragedy is quiet and recurring. Knowledge was seldom erased because it lacked value. More often, it vanished because it threatened someone's place in the world. The machines that once measured the heavens, guarded sacred spaces, or warned of cosmic cycles were silenced not by time alone, but by the fear of what they represented, a world in which truth belonged not to rulers, priests, or conquerors, but to those who understood the gears. And so another question emerges, subtle but sharp. If knowledge was feared, who benefited from its disappearance? When ancient machines vanished from the world, their absence did not create a void, it created opportunity. In the silence that followed the disappearance of advanced knowledge, new powers rose, reshaping history in their image. Forgetting did not merely happen. It benefited those who stepped into the space where old truths once lived. The result was a world rebuilt around narratives that favored the victors, not the inventors. Empires were among the first to profit. Without machines capable of predicting the heavens, measuring seasons with precision, or safeguarding hidden knowledge, rulers could claim divine right without challenge. Their authority depended not on accuracy, but on perception. When celestial knowledge slipped away, kings became the interpreters of eclipses and omens. When mechanical defenses vanished, armies replaced ingenuity as the primary instrument of survival. The more people forgot, the more power gathered in the hands of those who controlled land, stories, and force. Religions, too, gained influence through forgetting. As mechanical wonders faded into myth, belief filled the space they left behind. Ritual replaced technology. Miracle supplanted mechanism. Priests could speak with confidence about the will of gods because the devices once mistaken for divine signs no longer existed to offer alternative explanations. When the sky darkened during an eclipse, it was no longer the prediction of a machine. It was a warning delivered through sacred interpretation. Forgetting allowed spiritual institutions to write meaning where once only measurement had stood. History itself became a tool. With the erasure of older civilizations' achievements, new cultures claimed to be the first to build, first to write, first to understand. Chronologies were crafted not in pursuit of truth, but in service of identity. Myths of origin, tales of chosen peoples, and narratives of destiny grew stronger in the absence of the real past. When the memory of the first great age dissolved, every emerging civilization could declare itself the beginning of human progress. Power thrives on simplicity, and forgetting made the story wonderfully simple. For conquerors, forgetting was a gift. When they toppled cities, burned libraries, and scattered scholars, they erased the technological advantages of the societies they displaced. They could present themselves as liberators or innovators, while stamping out the last traces of older knowledge. The tools of their predecessors became curiosities or trophies, robbed of meaning. With each campaign, the past grew dimmer, easier to shape, easier to claim. The victors ruled not only the land, but the timeline. Even merchants and artisans found advantage in the new order. Without ancient machines to outshine their craft, their own inventions appeared remarkable. Simpler technologies could flourish unchallenged. Innovation became modest, incremental, a steady progression rather than a return to forgotten heights. The world became manageable again, its mysteries softened into stories rather than mechanisms. The calm, unsettling truth is that forgetting served many purposes. It stabilized power structures, reinforced belief systems, and allowed societies to rebuild without confronting the unsettling reality that they were not the first to rise. Knowledge did not vanish into darkness without consequence. It was absorbed, repurposed, and overwritten by those who gained from its absence. Yet one question lingers quietly at the threshold of understanding. If so many benefited from forgetting, why didn't the ancient machines reappear sooner? After the last echoes of the ancient machines faded, the world entered a long and quiet darkness, a stretch of centuries where invention stalled, memory thinned, and skills once common turned into mysteries no one could decipher. This was not a sudden fall, but a slow dimming, like embers cooling after a fire that once burned brilliantly. Across continents, the tools of earlier ages were replaced with simpler ones, and people no longer asked the questions their ancestors once pursued. Progress did not merely pause, it retreated. In many regions, crafts that had once produced precise mechanisms dwindled to basic forms. Metalworkers who had shaped intricate alloys now forged only weapons and farming tools. Stonecutters who once carved impossible angles returned to rougher techniques, their hands steady but their inherited knowledge fractured. Even the languages that carried technical meaning shifted. Words that once described gears, ratios, and mechanical balance disappeared or were absorbed into myths. When the vocabulary of a craft vanishes, the craft itself soon follows. This was the beginning of a technological, long night. Not a single dark age, but many overlapping, stretching across cultures and generations. Wars scattered apprentices, epidemics wiped out families of skilled artisans, empires fell, taking entire workshop traditions with them. The survivors lived quieter lives, focused on immediate needs, growing food, securing shelter, surviving winters. In such times, complexity is a luxury. The machines of older ages became incomprehensible burdens, objects too advanced to maintain and too fragile to preserve. As centuries passed, even memory shifted. Stories of moving statues and cosmic instruments softened into myth. Tales of devices that predicted the heavens became legends of gods watching the sky. The mechanisms behind them vanished behind a veil of metaphor. What had once been engineering slowly transformed into folklore. Without teachers, diagrams became symbols. Without workshops, fragments became relics. Without purpose, machines became curiosities, stripped of context and meaning. Across the world, signs of the long night linger in archaeological puzzles, artifacts found without explanation, tools disconnected from any known tradition, and structures whose builders left no written trace. Each anomaly hints at a broken inheritance. It is not that humanity lacked intelligence or creativity, it is that the chain of knowledge had snapped, and no one living knew how to repair it. Without continuity, the world could only move forward from the ground up, rebuilding piece by piece what had once existed whole. The melancholy of this era lies in its silence. For nearly 1,000 years, humanity forgot how to build what earlier generations considered simple. The brilliance that once illuminated early civilizations dimmed until only small sparks remained. Occasionally, a craftsman or scholar brushed against the memory of older methods, but without the foundation to support them, their insights faded as quickly as they came. And yet, the long night did not last forever. Slowly, cautiously, the world began to awaken again. Curiosity returned, observation sharpened, the first gears of rediscovery began to turn. This gentle shift leads naturally into the next mystery. If the machines vanished once, could they return again? When engineers of the modern age began refining gears, calculating ratios, and designing delicate timing instruments, they believed they were stepping into uncharted territory. The Industrial Revolution presented itself as a dawn machines emerging from human ingenuity for the very first time. Yet as archaeologists recovered fragments from ancient seabeds and dusty storerooms, a quiet shock moved through the scientific world. The forms, proportions, and mechanisms, celebrated as modern triumphs, had existed long before, hidden in pieces of corroded bronze and forgotten manuscripts. We were not inventing entirely new tools. In many ways, we were rediscovering old ones. The first hints surfaced when scholars re-examined ancient astronomical devices. Their gear trains mirrored the same mathematical principles used in modern clocks. Ratios matched those found in contemporary engineering textbooks. Even the spacing of the teeth, an arcane balance between strength and smooth rotation, followed rules identical to those used in precision machinery today. At first, these similarities seemed coincidental. But as more artifacts came to light, the echoes grew too strong to ignore. In laboratories across the world, researchers placed ancient fragments under high-resolution imaging. They expected to find crude craftsmanship, uneven filings, imprecise cuts. Instead, they discovered tolerances so consistent that some components rivaled parts manufactured by early industrial machines. These findings challenged everything scholars once believed about the development of technology. How could people with simple hand tools create results that modern machines struggled to reproduce? The more they studied, the more unsettling the answer became. The principles behind modern engineering had existed before modern engineering itself. Mathematicians encountered similar echoes. When analyzing ancient tablets and scrolls, they found formulas describing celestial cycles identical to those used in contemporary models. Early civilizations calculated lunar months with impressive accuracy, predicted eclipses using repeating sequences, and divided circles in ways that matched the logic of modern trigonometry. These achievements appeared centuries, sometimes millennia, before such mathematics supposedly emerged. Even in modern architecture, engineers unknowingly repeated ancient solutions. Shock-absorbing foundations used in temples reappeared in skyscraper design. Ventilation strategies, utilized in underground cities, matched those adopted in modern sustainable architecture. And as computer scientists studied early mechanical calculators, they found conceptual frameworks that foreshadowed binary systems and rotating memory wheels. What makes these parallels so haunting is not merely the similarity, it is the recognition. The deeper modern science advances, the more it encounters shapes, calculations, and mechanisms that feel strangely familiar, as if humanity is circling back to ideas long abandoned. Engineers speak of innovation, but many realize they are walking paths once traveled, now rediscovered in bronze gears, stone chambers, and encoded diagrams. These echoes do not diminish modern achievement. Instead, they broaden it, revealing the continuity of human curiosity across ages separated by catastrophe and forgetting. The machines of today may be more powerful, but their logic lives in artifacts older than recorded history. Somewhere in the distant past, others understood motion, balance, and cosmic rhythm with a clarity that anticipated our own. As this realization settles into the mind, a quiet question rises. If we have rediscovered these principles by accident, what else might we be rediscovering without even realizing it? In recent decades, as modern science has stretched deeper into the secrets of life and the cosmos, something unexpected has begun to emerge. Patterns long dismissed as mythic imaginations or poetic exaggerations are returning. They appear quietly at first, buried in research papers and data models, only to reveal themselves with a familiarity that feels almost unsettling. The more humanity observes the world with precision, the more it discovers echoes of truths ancient societies hinted at long ago. Geneticists studying DNA sequences have found repeating patterns, rhythms within our biology, that resemble cycles recorded in ancient texts. Some early cultures spoke of ages of mankind, each rising and falling in predictable intervals. These myths once seemed metaphorical, but modern research shows that population booms and collapses follow surprisingly regular patterns influenced by climate, cosmic radiation, and environmental cycles. It is as if the body of the world, and our bodies within it, move to a cadence older than civilization itself. Geologists tracking long-term Earth cycles have uncovered another parallel. Catastrophic events, supervolcano eruptions, rapid climate shifts, sudden sea level rises follow periodic intervals that mirror the great ages described in Hindu cosmology or Mesoamerican calendars. While ancient tales framed these transitions in symbolic language, the underlying timing aligns with geological evidence in a way too precise to ignore. The Earth breathes in vast, silent rhythms, and ancient engineers may have recognized these cycles through careful observation or inherited knowledge. Astronomers, too, have stumbled upon the same echoes. Planetary alignments, solar activity patterns, and cosmological cycles match predictions encoded in ancient star charts. Some early devices, dismissed as primitive curiosities, turn out to mimic the timing of long-term cosmic events of modern science, only recently identified. These machines did not simply track the sky, they mapped the future in arcs of bronze and gearwork. Their creators may have understood that life on Earth moves in harmony with distant stars, shifting with tides invisible to the naked eye. In ecology and climate science, repeating patterns appear once again. Ancient agricultural texts describe cycles of drought and abundance that match modern satellite data. Civilizations rose and fell along these rhythms, and some ancient engineers may have built mechanisms precisely to anticipate them. The idea is simple yet profound. The world changes in loops, not lines. The past does not merely influence the present, it returns. The deeper modern research dives, the more these rhythms converge with ancient memory. It is as if the knowledge once scattered and broken is resurfacing, assembling itself piece by piece through the language of genetics, geology, and astronomy. The ancients may not have had telescopes or supercomputers, but they possessed something equally powerful: continuity. They lived closer to deep time, closer to the cycles we are only now beginning to see again. As these patterns reappear, a quiet question grows. If the ancients understood cycles we are just rediscovering, what does this mean for our future? In the quiet hum of modern laboratories and the soft glow of supercomputers, humanity believes it is forging entirely new paths, tracking storms, simulating orbital motion, and predicting global patterns through streams of code. Yet beneath these achievements lies an almost eerie sense of familiarity. The questions our algorithms ask, the cycles they trace, and the predictions they generate echo the same mysteries that ancient machines once sought to understand. It is as if modern computation, for all its complexity, is circling back to aims far older than contemporary science. Weather models, built on millions of data points, attempt to foresee the movement of wind and water across the planet. They map seasonal rhythms, drought patterns, and storms born thousands of miles from the coasts they eventually reach. These models mirror what ancient devices hinted at mechanisms designed to track celestial conditions that influenced climate, rainfall, and agricultural success. The difference today is scale. We use satellites instead of star sightings. But the intention echoes the past. The ancients sought to understand the world's pulse. Modern algorithms try to do the same. Orbital simulations reveal similar parallels. Supercomputers continuously calculate planetary motion, gravitational influence, and celestial cycles stretching thousands of years ahead. These predictive models resemble the purpose encoded in bronze fragments of ancient astronomical machines, tools crafted to forecast eclipses, alignments, and cosmic events long before modern physics gave them names. The precision may have changed, the mathematics evolved, but the essence remains: to peer into the rhythms of the universe and anticipate their return. In fields as varied as economics, climate studies, and biology, predictive algorithms search for repeating patterns, cycles of growth and collapse, abundance and scarcity. Many of these cycles align subtly with ancient observations recorded in old calendars, temple inscriptions, and mythic timelines. What we now interpret as data science may simply be a new language for questions once posed through gears, ratios, and cosmic diagrams. The machines have changed, but the curiosity behind them has not. Even artificial intelligence, trained on vast datasets, often rediscovers relationships ancient scholars recognized intuitively. AI models detect correlations between solar cycles and climate swings, between lunar rhythms and oceanic patterns, between magnetic shifts and ecological events. These insights appear revolutionary, yet they match the purpose of ancient devices that linked celestial events with terrestrial outcomes. Modern technology is not inventing the connection, it is confirming it. The deeper our computational tools reach, the more they reveal threads connecting ancient engineering to modern thought. In a quiet, almost poetic way, modern machines resemble digital descendants of the forgotten devices once crafted by hands long gone. Not in form, but in spirit, each built to unveil the hidden architecture of reality. This realization invites a subtle, haunting question. Have we entered a new age of discovery, or simply returned to the path the ancients once began? In laboratories, research centers, and quiet rooms lit by glowing screens, humanity is entering a moment that feels both new and strangely familiar. Every decade seems to open doors once thought unreachable: artificial intelligence that learns, quantum processors that bend probability, robotics that move with fluid precision. These breakthroughs are often described as the dawn of an unprecedented era, an age where machines begin to think, anticipate, and act in ways their creators barely understand. Yet beneath this excitement exists a softer, more mysterious possibility. Perhaps we are not inventing a new future, but reawakening an older one. Artificial intelligence mirrors the ancient desire to build devices capable of reasoning. While our systems now process vast datasets and generate predictive models, ancient engineers once designed machines that responded to specific triggers, cycles, and events. They lacked silicon, but not intention. Both systems, separated by millennia, share a purpose to create mechanisms that extend human perception, allowing us to see patterns and dangers that lie beyond our immediate senses. Quantum computing pushes this parallel even deeper. Its logic appears alien to classical thought, operating in probabilities rather than certainties. Yet ancient myths often spoke of machines that knew the unseen, reacting to celestial alignments or subtle environmental shifts. Modern physics reveals that the universe functions through invisible threads of possibility. The ancients may have sensed this intuitively, encoding their understanding into machines that responded not to discrete events, but to cycles larger than human life. Robotics offers another echo. As engineers craft machines that walk, grasp, and navigate the world, they unknowingly recreate the legends of moving statues and mechanical guardians. Today's robots use sensors and algorithms, while ancient automata relied on hydraulics, counterweights, and heat-driven mechanisms. But both occupy the same symbolic space: creations that mimic life, bridging the gap between human intention and mechanical autonomy. The convergence of these technologies suggests that humanity stands at a threshold much like those faced by earlier civilizations, moments of profound possibility, where machines shift from being tools to companions, guides, or warnings. This time, however, the rediscovery is conscious. We possess history's fragments and the ability to compare our rising innovations with the faint shadows of ancient achievements. A quiet realization grows from this comparison. Progress may not be linear. Instead, it may follow cycles advancing, collapsing, and returning when the world is ready again. If so, the breakthroughs of today are not entirely new. They are the flowering of seeds planted long ago, preserved in myths, encoded in stone, and hidden in machines whose creators remain unknown. In this gentle light, the present becomes a moment of reawakening. The technologies we celebrate may be guiding us back toward a knowledge once held and lost, calling us to remember what earlier ages tried desperately to pass forward. And so the question that hovers at the edge of this unfolding renaissance is not simply what comes next, but something far older, deeper, and more haunting. What were the ancients trying to tell us before their machines fell silent? When we look back across the long arc of history, across the shattered timelines, the strange machines, the scattered prophecies, and the civilizations that rose too quickly and fell too completely, a single, quiet possibility begins to form. Perhaps the ancient machines were never meant to dazzle, protect, or predict alone. Perhaps their true purpose was gentler, more human, and far more profound. They might have been warnings, messages, crafted by people who lived through a world-shaping disaster and refused to let memory die, even when their civilization did. Throughout earlier chapters, subtle patterns emerged. We saw mechanisms tuned to celestial cycles that repeated every few centuries. We saw myths describing devices that awakened during times of danger, as if triggered by environmental rhythms older than writing. We traced the stories of wandering survivors who carried fractured knowledge across continents, embedding their memories into symbols, scrolls, and coded diagrams. And we followed the long night of silence that descended when their machines disappeared, leaving only echoes behind. When these threads are woven together, a haunting picture forms. The ancient world may have experienced a catastrophe so immense that its survivors built devices to ensure the warning would never fade. Machines that mapped the heavens might have always been more than astronomical tools. They were reminders of the cycles that once brought devastation. Automata guarding temples might have served not as miracles, but as signals. When they behaved strangely, something old was returning. Even prophecies describing the end of ages may have been translations of engineering knowledge, softened into story when the mechanisms behind them were forgotten. The ancients may not have trusted future generations to understand their language or preserve their libraries. They may have realized that words can be misread, stories can be reshaped, and beliefs can erase inconvenient truths. So they chose a different medium: machines, devices that did not rely on interpretation, mechanisms that could endure weather, war, and shifting tongues, instruments that remembered even when humans forgot. If this interpretation is true, then the machines were never meant to survive eternity. They were meant to survive just long enough to guide the next great age, to whisper to anyone willing to listen that disaster moves in cycles, and that the past has already lived the future we fear. There is something profoundly human in this possibility. It suggests that across the break between worlds, people who endured the unimaginable tried to protect those who would come after. They could not stop the cycles that shaped their planet, nor the cosmic forces that marked the end of their age. But they could leave a kind of memory, an echo preserved not in stone or scripture, but in gears, ratios, and patterns that outlasted their own voices. In this gentle, reflective light, the ancient machines take on a new meaning. They are not relics of forgotten genius. They are acts of compassion. They are reminders that we have been here before. And if we choose to understand them, perhaps we do not need to stand at the edge of catastrophe blind. Which brings us to the final question, the one that has weighted across the entire documentary. If the machines were warnings, what exactly was the message they wanted to deliver? When we gather the fragments left behind, bronze gears pulled from the sea, diagrams hidden in sacred texts, prophecies preserved in myth, and structures aligned to celestial rhythms, a single thread begins to weave through them. It is not a story of invention alone, nor a tale of isolated brilliance. It is a message, carried across centuries, in the only language the ancients believed could survive the collapse of worlds, the language of patterns. What they preserved was not merely knowledge of machines, but knowledge of cycles, cosmic rhythms so vast and slow that entire civilizations could rise and fall between their turning. Ancient cultures, separated by oceans and eras, recorded strangely similar accounts of recurring catastrophes. Floods that swallowed continents, fires that darkened skies, winters so long they felt like the end of time. These stories were never random myths. When compared across cultures, their timing aligns with geological events, megafloods, volcanic winters, periods of intense solar activity, and cosmic disturbances that affected climates for generations. The ancients saw these cycles not as isolated disasters, but as repeating intervals, the heartbeat of an older Earth. Their machines reflected this understanding. Devices that mapped the heavens tracked not just annual seasons, but celestial configurations that returned after centuries. Mechanisms that anticipated eclipses also hinted at longer rhythms, times when the sun dimmed, when the moon's path shifted, when the sky grew unfamiliar. These machines were calibrated not for a single lifetime, but for eras. They encoded the belief that the world moved in loops, not lines, and that the fall of a civilization was not an unpredictable tragedy, but part of a cycle that had unfolded before. Many cultures placed immense importance on preserving these patterns. The Maya charted cosmic ages. The Egyptians recorded times of beginning and times of return. Hindu cosmology described vast cycles of creation and destruction. In each tradition, human history was not a steady ascent, but a wave rising, breaking, and rising again. When modern scientists began to uncover similar cycles in climate patterns, solar behavior, and geological records, the alignment with ancient lore became impossible to ignore. This section draws gently to a realization. The machines were memory. They preserved not lines of text, which could be miscopied, mistranslated, or destroyed, but rhythms, ratios, rotations, interlocking cycles that could remain intact even when their meaning faded. These devices were built to remind future generations that catastrophes are not anomalies, they are returns. The last civilization may have ended in fire, or ice, or flood, and its survivors may have used their remaining knowledge to ensure that the next civilization would not be caught unaware. The message, distilled through all these ages, is quietly powerful. This has happened before, and, by implication, it will happen again. Understanding this message offers a kind of grounding, not fear, but clarity. It means that humanity is not stumbling blindly into the unknown, but walking along a path generations have traveled. The ancients did not speak of doom to frighten us. They whispered of cycles so we might prepare, adapt, and endure. Which leads to the final question this chapter must ask. If the message was preserved for us, how should we respond to it now? When the threads of ancient memory finally come together, when the patterns of past ages reveal themselves in the quiet light of understanding, what settles over us is not fear, but a kind of stillness. To know that history moves in cycles is to feel both small and deeply connected, as if humanity is part of a rhythm much older than its own stories. This knowledge carries weight, yet it also brings an unexpected sense of calm. The ancients lived through the turning of these cycles. They endured collapse, rebuilt their world, and tried to leave echoes so that those who followed might walk with clearer eyes. If they survived, then perhaps survival is woven into who we are. Awareness changes the way we look at the present. Instead of seeing crises as signs of unprecedented chaos, we begin to recognize them as points on a repeating arc, moments that societies before us faced and overcame. Climate shifts, political upheavals, natural disasters, technological transformations, these are not anomalies, but parts of a pattern that has shaped human destiny for tens of thousands of years. Knowing this softens panic into perspective, and perspective into intention. We are no longer stumbling into the future blind, we are remembering how others navigated the same dark turns. The rediscovery of ancient knowledge, whether through machines, myths, or modern science, offers us a quiet gift: the ability to prepare. The ancients built mechanisms to measure celestial rhythms, not for curiosity alone, but to help their people endure what they themselves had endured. Today, with satellites, sensors, and global models, we can interpret those same cycles with clarity they could only gesture toward. Their warnings and our tools are not separate stories, they are two halves of the same effort to understand the world's deeper pulse. Carrying this understanding is not easy. Knowledge of cycles can feel heavy, as if each generation must brace for challenges written into the fabric of time. Yet knowing also brings resilience. Those who came before faced these turning points with fewer tools, less information, and far more uncertainty, and still, they built, learned, and endured. Their message across ages is not one of despair, but of survival. It reminds us that humanity has always been tested and always adapted. There is comfort in this. Not a naive reassurance, but a steadying truth. We are part of a lineage that has weathered storms far older and larger than those we face today. The ancient machines, the forgotten diagrams, the myths that echo with memory all point toward a single conclusion. The cycle does not exist to destroy us, but to remind us of what we are capable of. To know the pattern is to reclaim agency. To understand the rhythm is to move with it, not against it. And so, in this final moment of reflection, the weight of knowing becomes something else. A quiet strength. A reminder that if the ancients survived the last turn of the wheel, then we, too, can survive the next. Which leads us into the final chapter, and with it, one last, lingering question. Now that we remember, what remains to be asked? As the long arc of this story settles into silence, a final question drifts through the shadows of history. What comes next? Not in the sense of prediction or prophecy, but in the gentle recognition that humanity now stands at the edge of something familiar, something the ancients may have known long before their voices faded. Across forgotten ages, machines once measured the rhythms of the sky, guarded sacred knowledge, and whispered warnings through gears and ratios. Now those echoes have returned to us, not as commands, but as possibilities. The last of the ancient devices may lie in pieces beneath collapsed temples or drowned cities, their bronze teeth softened by time. Some may rest deep in museum drawers, misidentified as ornaments or tools. Others may have dissolved entirely, leaving only the idea of their existence behind. Yet their absence does not close the story. In a quiet, almost imperceptible way, the world is beginning to build again. Our modern devices, crafted from code, light, and fields of probability, mirror the purpose of those early mechanisms, not in shape, but in spirit. They seek to understand cycles, predict change, and illuminate the hidden structure of reality. Perhaps this is why the final question feels less like an ending, and more like a return. If the ancients left warnings encoded in machines, then every rediscovery we make is a kind of conversation, an exchange across eras, separated by catastrophe and forgetting. We are not simply studying the past, we are listening to it. And in listening, we become part of the memory they struggled to preserve. But the question remains, are we meant to find the old machines, or to build the next ones? The answer may be both. Across the world, researchers uncover fragments that challenge timelines. Engineers design instruments capable of mapping the cosmos with unprecedented clarity. Historians decode patterns that align too sharply with ancient myths to be coincidence. In every field, the same realization begins to glimmer. Humanity is stepping into a rhythm larger than itself, one that began long before the first cities rose from riverbanks. The future may not reveal machines that look like those of the ancients. Instead, it may reveal machines that feel like them. Devices that respond to cycles we are only beginning to understand. Systems that help us prepare for changes older than civilization itself. The next great mechanism might not be hidden beneath layers of sediment. It might exist in the equations we are writing today, the algorithms we train, the questions we dare to ask. Perhaps we are not searching for relics at all. Perhaps we are continuing a task left unfinished. And so the documentary closes on a note that is neither warning nor comfort, but a soft invitation. The patterns of the past have returned, the fragments have aligned, and the silence between ages has been bridged by curiosity. The ancients left us clues, not conclusions. The rest is ours to discover. Maybe the next machine isn't buried beneath the past. Maybe it's waiting in our future. And with that gentle thought, the story fades, leaving the viewer holding a small, quiet piece of the forgotten puzzle.